Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Wiseman. I am joining you from Mill Park in Johannesburg, South Africa, and I am the moderator for today's digital dialogue. For the benefit of the participants who are blind and have visual impairment, all speakers will begin with a short self-description. So I will start. So I am Wiseman. I am Wiseman. I have very, very short black hair and I have a small beard. I am wearing my brown square framed eyeglasses and I am wearing a white t-shirt. Today's discussion will actually examine how the emerging geopolitical shifts, such as the rise of digital authoritarianism, regional data sovereignty, and the fragmentation of the internet, how those are affecting the global digital landscape. And we've seen that in the wake of, the shift in global power dynamics and changing geopolitical tensions, we are witnessing the alignment of powerful tech companies with political objectives. Hence, the digital space is increasingly being shaped by factors beyond technology itself. So we are delighted to welcome to the panel today Taysir, the EU Advocacy Officer. She is an EU Advocacy Officer for the digital right at ALM. And then we have Philip Kabuye, who is a policy advisor in digital rights and space at Oxfam Novib. Then we have Gbenga Sesan, who is an executive director at Paradigm Initiative. Full bios will be dropped on the chat as each speaker is actually speaking, and then you can read more on them. And I think to start off us today, each panelist will actually introduce themselves and frame the issue by sharing the current landscape and their key points for around 5 minutes, and then we'll have some discussions and questions. And also, please don't forget, as the speakers are giving their points and sharing on their current landscape, please don't forget to post your questions into the chat, and we'll get back to them later in the session. Taysir, would you please turn on your camera and join me on screen? And would you please just introduce yourself, share your key point, but remember to start with a brief self-description. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Wiseman. Hello, everyone. I'm Taysir Mathlouthi, and I'm the EU Advocacy Officer at Hamle, which is a Palestinian digital rights organization advocating for the rights, the digital rights of Palestinians in Palestine, Israel, but also in the diaspora. So as I said, I'm Taysir. I will self-present myself. I'm an Arab woman. I have long brown hair. I'm wearing glasses and I have a white jumper today. And I will start my very short talking points. So today I'll be mostly talking about the situation post October 7th in Gaza, Palestine, and Israel, and how the genocidal war that is happening in Gaza after October 7th is also a war that is happening in the digital realm, and how digital social media platforms have been part of this war in different ways, and how online violence is also being shifted to offline violence in the Palestinian territories. So at Hamle, the organization I work with, we've been documenting the exacerbation of online censorship and the shifts of social media platforms policies after October 7th. We've been mostly focusing on the biggest social media platforms, Meta, YouTube, X, and TikTok. And we've sort of seen that they all lowered their human rights due diligence policies towards Palestinian content, and they also over-moderated content from Palestinian, pro-Palestinian, and Arabic voices. These policies were mostly decided from within the big tech companies. They all decided that after October 7th, they can't deal with the amount of Arabic content, apparently, and they have to lower their threshold and be less detailed about what they have to moderate and what should be directly deleted. But we've also documented how the Israeli Digital Warfare Desk was directly sending requests to the platforms for content takedowns and accounts restrictions. And the requests made by the Israeli Digital Warfare Desk were mostly approved by the social media platforms by 90%. So here we can directly see a clear link of the influence of governments on the content moderation decisions made by the companies, and how companies don't decide by themselves what should be moderated, but to mostly approve what the governments are asking them to moderate. In December 2024, the BBC itself released an investigation proving how the social media platforms, Facebook and Instagram, restricted news in the Palestinian territories after October 7th by 77%. So the Palestinian population couldn't even have access to Palestinian media outlets and news produced by Palestinian journalists. It was most of the time shadow banned and restricted. So content restriction and over moderation of Arabic content is an issue, but one of the biggest issues we are seeing right now is also the monetization of violence and how platforms such as YouTube, for example, have been accepting genocidal ads against the Palestinian population. The Israeli government itself was the one paying for these ads and asking for these ads to be released on the platform YouTube. And those ads were mostly targeting European countries, mostly France, Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark as well, and they were directly calling for the killing and the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. And now we should ask ourselves how YouTube is accepting these ads and making money from this war. So this is from the Israeli government, but we also should look at what's happening in Europe and how social media platforms are receiving direct complaints from public authorities. And that's, for example, the case in France, where there is a platform called Pharos, where the French authorities are directly asking the social media platforms to restrict or delete content. And we've seen a huge increase of pro-Palestinian content or Arabic content being taken down by the platforms because of the French government asking them to do so. So obviously, we will talk about it later, but what's happening is being exacerbated by the current news made by Zuckerberg and the current new government in the US, where fact-checking at Meta doesn't exist anymore, and where they want to focus more on community nodes and, according to them, to allow more freedom of expression and opinion. What's currently happening is that harmful and hateful content is now being accepted. That creates a very dangerous online environment for Palestinians who are already facing online violence that is being translated to the offline. And we are seeing that this is increasing. And this is also related to the race to AI innovation, where digital dehumanization is being increased, and where Palestinians are being framed within algorithms and without and are being silenced by those algorithms used by those social media platforms. So hopefully we'll be talking a bit more later, and those are my talking points now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Taysir. You can now turn off your camera, and I would like to welcome Philip to join me on the screen. Good afternoon, Philip. Please turn on your camera and mute yourself and share your opening comments, and don't forget to begin with your self-description.
Thank you, Wiseman, and thank you, Taysir. Really interesting conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session today. Happy to be here to share a bit on the topic. My name is Philip Kabuye. I work with Oxfam Novib as the policy advisor on digital rights and space, and I'm calling in today from Uganda. I'm a black man with a black complexion. I am putting on a blue shirt, slightly short hair, and I have black headsets on me. In today's conversation, I wanted to focus a bit on the role of the legislations. As we know, if we're talking about safeguarding the digital environment, the regulations play a very big role, and especially in this now shifting geopolitics, there's a lot that we can achieve, but there's also a lot at stake. And I stem my conversation today from a deep desire to safeguard our space as a society, a space where fundamental freedoms are respected and observed, a space where we can voice our concerns freely, and where we can gather to push for positive change, but also call out governments or states to undertake their duty to protect us as we exercise our rights. And today, as we all know, this has a huge bearing on the digital space. And if digital technology can be used to stifle dissent and constrict our freedoms like this, as just shared in Palestine, then it must also be harnessed to expand and safeguard our freedoms. And as we know, again, a key aspect of safeguarding our freedoms is through legislations. We also know it is quite a tool that has been misused to weaponize tech across the globe, context to context. And looking at going a bit back for a long time, we've witnessed the global north or the Western world being an architect of digital rights, shaping global norms and standards, and this has a huge impact on the rest of the world through policies that we've seen, like the GDPR, the DSA, and a lot more. Also, content moderation policies, like what this has talked. We've seen these frameworks influence lots of policy globally. And for many countries also in the South, they are either directly adopting them or using them as models for national regulations. So that has been the case. But now it's at odds with reality. While we recognize the progressive digital rights policies that have been setting standards, we've also witnessed autocratic regimes increasingly drawing inspiration from restrictive policies instead, and turning regulation into a tool for repression. For instance, if we look at the intersection of the EU's rights-based approach, China's state control approach, and the US's market-driven approach, we see a growing push towards digital sovereignty, not to protect rights, but to control the digital space and restrict fundamental freedoms. For example, if you look at China's data localization laws that are very strict, these have inspired digital sovereignty policies in many places in the South, India, some African countries already, and this is leading to tighter control over online spaces. When we look at the UK's Online Safety Act, it is giving authoritarian governments an excuse to justify weakening encryption for surveillance, to justify censorship, and and all that. But also the regulations, especially around social media in the US and to an extent in the EU, that are meant to curb disinformation, they are being weaponized by autocratic regimes instead now to justify crackdown on dissenting voices. So instead of protecting digital rights, as we see some regulatory frameworks being co-opted by authoritarian states and ideally blurring the lines between the legitimate governance and state control. And in a way, this also brings about a fundamental crisis in digital governance. And while we have this, I keep thinking, as civil society, we've had a fallback on the rights-based approach led by the EU. And this is deeply rooted into the international frameworks like the International Convention on Human Rights, the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights, International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, name it, so many of them. And all these predate the modern day regulations that we have or legislations. And these have been our strongholds, very good reference points to justify the need to safeguard fundamental freedoms, because they've already served as a reminder on what we've agreed, what we've been signatories to as countries that are signatories to these international frameworks. But when you do a quick check, you'll have a question whether these are the true reference points for digital rights today. I mean, celebrating the Europe-led rights-based approach in drafting legislations and embracing them as rights, respecting. It's an important reference point, safeguarding fundamental freedoms. But if we check the reality and we look amidst the competing regulatory models, Europe-based, China, the EU, US market-driven, and then inconsistencies like the controversial EU chat law that is under debate. It's very controversial, seeking to undermine encryption-based private messaging services, ideally to tackle a child's sexual abuse material, but a clear violation of privacy. We see how global digital rights frameworks are being manipulated. And with such developments, we can't miss seeing this existential risk of losing this crucial foundation. So this, in a way, drives me back towards civil society, where we can try to put our efforts. I think one of the things is thinking around trusted spaces to protect our fundamental freedoms, as I think what you see from Taysir is more in relation to big tech companies being in bed with governments to try and erode dignity. So what are alternatives? For example, Oxfam Novib has a Power to Voices platform where loyalty is back to civil society to ensure that activists continue doing what they have to do. But then it comes back to us to push back on double standards, holding global north and governments in the south accountable when rights are compromised, but also advocating for universal, people-centered and human rights-centered policies. But then maybe to a certain extent to tell the story, especially for the global south, because the policies implemented have a bearing on the implementation across the globe that takes the south, and it is the south is not involved or consulted or brought into the co-creation, and yet the burden still stays to implement the same laws that are not considerate of the southern context that spans, infrastructure, span literacy, economies, and so on and so forth. So if the rules of the digital world continue to be dictated by and for the North, then the South remains passive. it remains more of a passive recipient rather than an active shaper of its digital future. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those key points. You can now turn off your camera. I would like to welcome Gbenga to join me on the screen. And Gbenga, please don't forget to begin with a self-description.
Thank you, Wiseman. Good day, everyone. I'm glad to be here, and I'm already learning. This is quite interesting. My name is Gbenga Sesan. I'm Executive Director at Paradigm Initiative. I am a Black man. I have black hair with slightly graying beard. Today, I'm wearing an African print top with various shades of blue and a streak of white. To discuss today's topic, I want to focus on three things that are shrinking and a few things that clearly must not shrink if we have to find the way forward. And the first for me is the shrinking civic space. And this did not start yesterday. This didn't start last year. The organization I work for, Paradigm Initiative, has been producing an annual report on the digital rights and digital inclusion space across various African countries since 2015. And even before we started writing the reports, we were beginning to see the civic space shrinking. But over the last few years, we've started talking about things like post-truth era, where there is your truth, my truth, and all shades of arguments that do not anchor on any fundamental norms or values. But beyond that, we also began to see increasing abuse of the power of technology. So the internet that was created for the primary purpose of making sure that we improve work, we improve relationships, we improve business opportunities, is now being abused. Not only because there are people who are bad actors using the internet, but also because you have an unfortunate situation where some governments are clamping down either through internet shutdowns or throttling the internet, or even specifically focusing on certain platforms. This is why we talk about the internet and the digital space as literally the last standing civic space. Not only is this being affected by nation states who create new laws, who create new standards, who want to control the internet more, but also even by cloud nations. And by cloud nations, I generally refer to platforms who themselves have started introducing weird, conditions. A very simple example is the recent announcement by Meta that Facebook will literally tweak or bring an end to some of the things that people relied on as far as fact-checking is concerned, a shrinking civic space. We also, of course, have the shrinking digital funding, not just digital, shrinking funding for development work generally. And I think what many of us have been part of conversations over the last few days and weeks about this. And one thing we know for a fact right now is that this is not just about Donald Trump. This is not just about the United States. This is not just about far-right governments, but this happens to be a fundamental shift in financing models for social innovation and nonprofit efforts. And it means that in the midst of this shrinking funding, we must find innovative ways to get our work done, because a lot more work needs to be done. I said to a few of my colleagues that this is not a 90-day pause. This is not a 4-year disruption. This is a fundamental shaking of the foundations of how we fund good work. The third, which is also critical, is shrinking legitimacy. Many times we're quick to throw Russia and China, and they do deserve it, under the bus because they are, for example, I work a lot in internet governance, and I know that those two countries have always argued for multilateral governance, just by governments of the internet, and not multi-stakeholder, where civil society, academia, media, and others have a chance. They've always argued for a scenario where multi-stakeholders are not in the room. But the interesting thing is that complaints about Russia and China, while they are gaining more ground, one of the reasons is because of the hypocrisy of the West. And the reason I say this is because we've seen recent actions by people who, in Western countries, held themselves as vanguards of digital rights and of human rights and of internet freedom, and began to backslide by taking actions that are not helpful to the community. And instead of naming and shaming them, as we have done for previous actors, including Russia and China, people are advising that you should be a bit more diplomatic. And I think the challenge is that if you name and shame bad actors in the global south, and you ask for diplomacy when bad actors are from the global north, then there's only one name for it. It's called hypocrisy. Those are shrinking things. Civic space, digital funding, and legitimacy. But there are things that must not shrink. One of them is collaboration across silos. The days when we used to see ourselves as big competitions, yes, we're still competing for resources, but we must learn to go beyond our competition to collaboration and making sure that this happens across silos and across thematic areas. That is important more than ever. In fact, my fundamental theory of how we survive the funding pause and the shaking that is coming for financing is that more people must work together. Secondly, is the need for us to spotlight lived experiences. There are so many things happening right now, and that will happen over the next few months as the US funding pause takes a lot more center stage and as Russia and China try to fill the void that has now been created. When we get into those scenarios, we must learn that there are people who have had lived experiences in these areas, and we must learn from them. And finally, as much as possible, we must realize that while we celebrate small wins, we must build staying power. This is not a 90-day problem. This is not a 4-year problem. This is not just about Donald or far-right governments. This is a multi-year generational shift that we must come together to handle. Thank you. Over to you, Westman.
Thank you very much, Gbenga. I think we'll now move on to the second part of today's dialogue and provide opportunity for speakers to ask questions to one another based on their opening input. I now invite Taysir and Philip to turn on their cameras back on and to ask each other questions to tease out the relationship and intersections in the current landscape and maybe around your work as well. Taysir, Philip, and Gbenga, feel free to ask each other questions and have your cameras on. Do we have any burning questions? Maybe I'll choose Taysir. Is there any question that maybe you had as the fellow speakers were giving their points?
Yes, thank you, Wiseman. I was wondering what at some point what Philip you said, and I do think that's what we currently see, the geopolitics between the US and the EU, when you were comparing the human rights approach of the EU in opposition to the free market one in the US. But I was like wondering, don't you think that what's also currently happening in the EU with the new, for example, High Commissioner on tech sovereignty and digital rights being pro-innovation and kind of anti-regulation, don't we also like take the path of free market in the EU, especially with what's happening right now with the US taking very challenging decisions towards the EU and the EU trying to be as competitive as possible. Obviously, we have regulations such as the DSA and the AI Act, but don't we think that we are also like trying to use those regulations to push for more innovation and less, obviously, less human rights diligence policies?
Thank you, Taysir. When you say that, I start running through an increasing number of EU governments that now also becoming more far right led, and many times with far right led governments, it's not hard to notice that they can easily fall towards the approach of the kind of US's model right now. But I think what remains important for me is the aspect of not letting go on the fundamental rights. If, for example, you look at what the European Commission is trying to fund today through its citizens equality and rights and values program, it is to uphold the values of the EU. And of course, these are values that are deeply enshrined within the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. For me, I think that is important. But also seeing more funders coming out there with a keen eye, pulling resources together with a keen eye on the new kind of far right influenced development, and trying to make sure that the fundamental rights, the fundamental freedoms are protected. For me, I think that is quite important. So to come back, as developments are happening, we expect a lot to be happening. That's why we have the EU chat control law being debated. It's been on for a long time now. Even as we know, it is a direct erosion of privacy. But maybe then it comes back as a call to us as civil society. Many times I keep struggling with the thought of how do we manage the chasm between governments that are trying to protect the citizens and civil society trying to ensure that these governments respect and protect the fundamental freedoms of the citizens. So we somehow meet in between and have a clash. But how do we get out of that? Maybe how do we tell the story? I was thinking earlier today, maybe at a certain time as civil society, we need to start thinking about alternatives for the governments that don't actually erode our fundamental rights, but rather uphold the rights of those that they wish to protect.
Thank you, Philip. And perhaps do you have a question maybe that you can pose back to the speakers as well, Taysir or Gbenga, that you had, or a comment on maybe one of the key points or statements they made?
Yeah, Tessa shared about Palestine. I so fondly always think about Palestine and the context in there. And a question of alternatives always comes to my head, because many times we've been tuned to struggle with an already written narratives of these autocratic states, and the more we fight, it's their script. How far shall we go down their script? I feel like it's indirectly leading us into their path. But the more we think about alternatives, we write our own script to try and safeguard human rights. So I keep thinking about Palestine with the question of have we had some alternatives to these big tech companies, to the usual social media like what you mentioned, and if we haven't, is it something that would work out? Is it something that would save the day? Because I could imagine if I was in a situation, I would want to look for somewhere safe, somewhere trustworthy, somewhere inclusive, where I'm not going to be shadow banned so have there been alternatives? Or maybe what are your thoughts around alternatives in such a context?
Thank you, Philip, for this very important and difficult question. To be honest, it's, I mean, obviously, the social media platforms we're talking about, which are Meta, Google, YouTube, X, TikTok, are monopolizing the digital realm and are the main social media platforms used by billions in the world. So when we're talking about using an alternative social media platforms, we have to think about what does it mean for the Palestinian civilians on the ground, but also content creators and journalists who already have their audiences on their platforms. So this is very complicated. I know that many are calling for the boycott of those platforms. Many are calling for trying to find other platforms and trying to create content and get information from other platforms. Obviously, we need that, and we have to continue to push for alternatives. But at the end of the day, Meta, YouTube, X, TikTok won't disappear sooner, and we have to think about how we can hold those companies accountable for what they are doing. What is really important right now when it comes to the genocidal war in Gaza is at some point, if the ICG says what's happening in Gaza is a genocide, then we have to look at how those social media platforms can be held accountable and can be seen complicit of the genocides. Because genocidal rhetorics, harmful content, hateful content have been spreading on those platforms without content moderation. And people have been killed because of that. And at the same time, people have been killed because of online censorship and because of internet disruptions. So basically, Meta, Google can go to court and can be held accountable for what they're for their decisions, not only in Palestine but also in Myanmar and different situations. So I do think that's the position we're taking. We're at Hamle, we're pushing for holding those companies accountable, and this is through litigation. This is through courts such as the ICC and the ICG. And it's also about documenting how those companies, which are social media platforms, are also working on digital dehumanization through AI and through weaponization of AI. We have to look at how Google and the CEO of Google is now affirming that they are selling AI technologies to the Israeli army, and getting all this information we have and using it for litigation, court purposes, for them at the end to be potentially seen as complicit of a genocide and complicit of war crimes. I do think that's the important thing we should do. And at the same moment, we also should think of alternatives. But this is a long run, I would say.
Thank you so much, Taysir and Philip, for the discussion. And I wouldn't want to close the door off without inviting you, Gbenga, in the last few minutes, if you have any comments based on what the speakers have said or any questions, and we can just get through them maybe in the 3 minutes that we have.
Okay, thank you. So thanks, Taysir, and thanks a lot, Philip. I'm sitting and I'm asking myself that, so we're right in the middle of a major shift, not just in terms of geopolitics and digital space, but in funding, in the civic space and all that. What are your thoughts about what we must do? And to be honest, I'll be very geographically focused right now. As Global South civil society organizations, what do you have to do right now to be able to, one, understand what's going on, because context matters, and two, reach out across the aisle to work with other organizations that are doing similar work? Thanks.
All right. I can start, but also try to be very brief, so Taysir can come in. But I think to start with, I think we need to find ways to bring back loyalty into civil society. Today, we're ideally running crazy with all these tech oligarchs and their policies, and how they abetting techno-authoritarianism and digital repression. So, but the thing starts from there. It starts from them having the power, having all the data and all the control. And this is something we can take back as civil society. And because our loyalty lies with the people first before everything else. So for me, I think that is really, really important to create such trustworthy but also inclusive spaces for the South. And again, just to reiterate, is we need to tell our own story. We need to frame our own narratives, and we need to influence our own policies that are rights respecting and very inclusive of the context, very thoughtful of what is happening within the various contexts. I'll stop there, Taysir.
Thank you, Gbenga, and thank you, Philip. I would say when it comes to funding, which is maybe one of the biggest issues we're facing right now, is that we can't be dependent of Western governments anymore, and we can't continue to follow their own agendas to be able to work, because we are always put in a sort of like state of emergency where we have to understand the requirements of those governments and their own agenda and policies, and at the same time serve the people we are advocating for. So I do think that we should sit, rest, and think of like new ways of funding our own work. I do think that we should look at individual donations. We should look at how grassroots organizations are doing it. We should also look at how maybe our sector isn't meant to be a sector where people are being paid with salaries. Maybe we should go back to a voluntary base and see that unfortunately we can't do all the things we are doing now. It's also about understanding our capacity and say, I can't work on all those issues. I'll focus on this or this small topic, and I'll give space for others to also join the movement and join the advocacy work we're doing. So to be honest, I think that most of the organizations, and especially human rights organizations from the global south are lost right now. No one really understands what's going to happen, especially I would say in 1 year. I think that we also should kind of, as Philip said, like try to like go back to also a sort of state of collaboration and ethic from within different organizations, and stop also going to the competitive aspect of the NGO world, because that's also the funding system from the Western governments that is like putting us in this competition between different organizations. So I do think that the shift we are facing right now is a huge one. We have to think about we will still be there in the next couple of years. And if we think that we might disappear in a way or another, that's why we should sit, rest, and like think about it. Obviously, I don't think that we'll do the things the same way we were doing them before. And I don't think that's for that's only a bad thing. I think that's also for the best. And I think that we need also to be more independent in the way we're working.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Taysir, and the rest of the speakers, Philip and Gbenga. I can actually see questions and comments actually appearing in the chat, and I think we'll use the remaining 8 minutes to take, and get through some of those questions. And I have one, which is a question from Mariah at Plan International in the Zoom chat. And I think she's asking based on what Taysir and Philip were speaking about. And she was asking, given your experiences, what advocacy strategies can be used by civil society to hold tech companies and government accountable for upholding digital rights and freedom of expression and ensuring a safe online space for all. And yeah, I think between you, Taysir, and Philip, one can take it, and then we can move to the other ones.
Thank you. Just very fast, because Maria also says that the rapid evolution of technology often outpaces regulation and policymakers lack the technical expertise to craft effective rules. For me, I think that is really true. But I'm challenged by the fact that the policymakers, the state actors don't recognize this. So all their response to developments in tech seem to be in a panic. They're in a rush. They're scared of what is happening, and they are not really tapping into the potentials that they have within their own countries. I see this happening in so many different countries. But to be fast and respond as well, I want to bring this back to also what Gbenga said. The aspect of collaboration. As civil society, we many times the capacity is not as much for us to be able to push back effectively, or not effectively, but to influence such decision, especially when regimes are, authoritarian. So, but we have a project. It's called Recipe, centering civic internet through partnership engagement in Oxfam. And one of the things this project is doing is bringing together the different stakeholders, those in government, the regulators, the activists, the tech, the telecom companies, and whoever is within the ecosystem coming together into a conversation. Can we listen to each other here and find or forge a way forward together? I really find that really very strong and quite progressive. Taysir, to you.
I'll be very quick. Yeah, I just think that our former strategies were around name and shame. So basically, name and shame those big tech companies that are not following human rights due diligence policies and aren't following international human rights and international humanitarian law. But right now, because of the current geopolitical shifts, we see that those companies do not care. So to be honest, I don't have a specific answer to that. We're still reworking our advocacy strategy and understanding how we could threaten and answer better to those companies. But I do think that CSOs should be harsher towards those big tech companies.
Thank you so much, Taysir. And I think because this question is just coming up because you guys both spoke of collaboration and perhaps solidarity as well. And I'm just thinking really if maybe I can give it to one of you to just maybe say what are some of the best, practices for fostering international solidarity and collaboration among civil society organizations to actually navigate this new digital normal. And yeah, perhaps one of you can answer. And I think maybe to just all of you guys, one maybe more on political influence is how can civil society organizations, as many of them are here, how can they more effectively influence these digital policies, I think at both national and international levels, to actually ensure that the digital policies are inclusive and they are rights-based. So maybe anyone to answer the first one, and I would just like to hear your thoughts as speakers. Anyone on best practices for fostering international solidarity and collaboration? Gbenga, do you have any comments?
Sure. One thing we've all learned is nothing binds people together like mutual tragedy. And this is why I talk about lived experience. I think that there are two things that are at play. One is lived experience, the other is expertise. It's much easier for us to have collaboration and for us to have cooperation when, one, we share lived experience. And this is why at times I talk about regional cooperation, where it's easier for you to understand exactly what the other person is talking about, not in a case where people are talking about their challenges and it sounds theoretical to you. In that case, you don't understand the issues and you may find it difficult to cooperate with them. And the second is area of expertise. We need to align the need with the expertise. And that was one of the things we were talking about earlier in terms of what civil society can do right now as far as tech companies are concerned. I agree with Taysir that there are many platforms that really don't care and will align more with regulation and politics than caring about doing the right thing. But this is where we need to get creative with our communications. Many of us produce reports. Many of us write articles. Many of us have those webinars. One thing that we've done at Paradigm Initiative, and that has helped a bit, is that we wrote this report on digital rights on the African continent for 4 years. And yes, academics, researchers, and civil society organizations were reading them, but no one beyond the immediate circles were looking at them. And then we made the decision in 2019 to convert this 400-page reports into 25-minute short films. Magic. New categories of people, faster consumption, and new conversations began to happen. So I think that, yes, to collaborate together, we need to merge our expertise and lived experience, and also for us to have a lot more impact on some of the things that we've called out. We have to get more creative with our communications. That is how we get people talking about the issues that matter. That is how we get people concerned, and it's not just us making noise and saying this is wrong, but it becomes literally, if I may borrow the word, viral.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gbenga. And then maybe lastly, before I take another question on the chat, how then does civil society then position themselves to more effectively influence the digital policies at this national and international level to ensure that, we drive these changes happening within the digital space and not have, things happen to us, and we ensure that all these digital policies are inclusive and they are rights-based? How do we then do it? Any one of the speaker to take it before I take one last question from the chat?
Two quick things. One is knowledge. The second is action. Knowledge meaning that we need to understand what the issues are, because the more we understand the issues, the more our contributions will make sense. And I can give very practical examples. There are countries where they had policy gaps like a broadband plan, and members of civil society demonstrated that knowledge and were then able to write the plan for the country, literally. And the second is action. We react to many things, and if we're not careful, we're going to end up fighting fires and get burned if we're not careful. But we need to take action proactively. If there is a policy gap, there is nothing that stops us from drafting a policy brief or drafting a bill.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Gbenga. And I think just in the last two minutes, there's a question to all speakers, and it speaks about that technology transcends borders, yet regulation remains fragmented. While the EU is advancing AI governance, many regions lack similar safeguards. This uneven approach poses two risks. First, weak protection in unregulated regions, and secondly, the possibility that the regulation creates a competitive disadvantage, discouraging governments from acting. What would a balanced regulatory model look like? One that safeguards digital rights without stifling innovation? And how should civil society strategically push for global accountability in tech governance? And I'll give it to all of you guys. And if you can keep your responses under 2 minutes, we would be happy.
I can start, and I'll be very quick. I do think that we need regulation in different regions, especially for global majority countries, but I don't think we need global regulation, and I don't think that EU or US regulations, such as, for example, the DSA in the EU, should be seen as a global example. I don't think that the DSA is a perfect regulation when it comes to global majority countries. There are extraterritorial impacts that might be negative for the populations from different regions. That's the case for Palestinians, where discriminatory policies against Arabic content and Arabs in general could continue through via the DSA. So I do think that global majority countries should either be part of multi-stakeholder consultations when it comes to those regulations to take into account global majority countries, or work themselves on specific regulations and policies, either regional or national ones. But I don't think that governments should be scared of regulating, and that's for the better, even for them.
Thank you, Taysir. And before I move to Philip and Gbenga, 10 seconds, what would be your concluding remarks?
I only would say that we are living in very difficult times, not only for CSOs, but also for our individual freedom and our important human rights. And I do think that's where we will see solidarity and collaboration. Those harsh times will prove that we are still able to be solidar and to work together.
Thank you, Taysir. Philip, concluding remarks?
Okay, thank you. I think to conclude, I'll borrow the words of Gramsci, who says the old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born, and now is the time for monsters. So we are in the time for monsters and dealing with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Gbenga.
Thank you. I think in terms of regulation, very quickly, we need to challenge the idea of regulation as a form of control. Regulation is fundamentally about creating standards, but when it's about control, we need to challenge that. And my closing thought would be that this is a time that tests and proves the reason why we exist, raison d'etre. We need to play the long game. We were here before now, and we'll be here after the challenges if we play the long game.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all our speakers. I think this was such a stimulating conversation and a comprehensive discussion, really. I think on the various dimension of how shifting geopolitics are affecting the digital space and the role in which civil society can play in responding to these changes. I think more than anything, we've learned more about the future trends, and it came up that collaboration and solidarity is actually a way in which we can try to mend this new digital normal. And we've learned more about the policy and the political influence on the space as well. But I just want to once more time to thank Taysir for joining us. Philip, thank you so much. And Gbenga, thank you for being part of this digital dialogue. The interpreters, the technical team, thank you so much.